Hello again. I'm Jen Brazelli.
And I'm Kyle Godby, and we're doing Field Notes from the Swamp.
We are.
Right? That's what it's called? Yeah, that's what it's called.
So where are we starting today? Something about temporality, perhaps?
That's a great place to start, temporally. Somebody asked us it was one of the outlier comments, not outlier comments in that it was a strange anomaly, but in the pattern of all of the questions that I saw in our original Complexity Lounge talk. It was the one that I looked at and said, we could do an entire talk on this all together. Everything else, lots of stuff there, everything bunched together, but that was the one that didn't fit neatly into a group. That was an entire talk all on its own. And I stuffed that aside and said, we will get there. And I think we're finally here.
Do you remember the actual wording? Was the question just literally temporality ? Like, what was the actual?
I think the actual question was, how do you think about temporality in your work?
Oh God, yeah.
So it was like such a broad stroke. Well, do you consider time when you're working? Let's start there.
To me, it's like, well, we can't separate it from space, so there's that. I actually mentioned that on a recent little podcast thing. Somebody asked me about how do you manage if you're supposed to zoom out in space and time for whatever reason, how do you do that? And I was like, well, as a human, it makes sense. We have to kind of peel them apart and do it separately, but they're not separate. But we won't need to go down that rabbit hole just yet. We did talk about this briefly in one of the previous conversations where we were kind of getting into the shelf life of certain insights or the sort of pace layers at which things we're doing have impact at different either altitudes or kind of. So there was we skated next to the concept of temporality there, but I sense that you and I have a bigger, more meaty angle on this to get into. So tell me what is top of mind for you right now, and then I can, or if you want me to go, I will as well. But I have a sense where I think I know you're going to go.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts here, and it's what as a process engineer and learning Six Sigma, one of the tools that I went back to often, or that was requested of me most, was the swim lane, because we had waterfall processes. It starts here and it moves through the line, and there's a handoff, and then the next person takes it and down the line, right? And then our service blueprints don't look all that different, but at least they are not centered around a product moving through a assembly line, but it is the orchestration. It is hopefully the mutual success of multiple actors that are collaborating on this service that is executed. But the one thing those two have in common is, without chronology, none of it makes sense. It has to be this linear flow of first this and then that. And if that relationship breaks down, it doesn't visualize very well. And there's not a really good way to make sense of that. And I find every time I've sat down and gone through that, or every time I've coached somebody or sat with them while they've been working on this, they've gone to their research and they've said, I work in this space where people do things a little bit differently at each of these hops. Sometimes they do this first and they do that, and then sometimes they do this first and they do it, and sometimes they don't come into the process until 5 steps later, or until somebody else has done something else. They intersect with a thing at a different level of development, so what they're getting is refined to a different level. How do I represent that? And I have had to laugh and say, service blueprints don't do that.
How do you represent that, Kyle?
Good question. This is where I like ecosystem maps, sort of, and I know ecosystem map. I think we talked about this before. Ecosystem maps are fluffy. That's a massive container.
Label is very all-purpose.
It's circles and lines. It's squiggly lines. It's an ecosystem
and boxes
map,
and
right?
right angles. What do you have against lines and right angles, guys? God,
it's sacred geometry to some extent, right?
Some Fibonacci sequence there. It's fine.
Yeah, but I think there's an allowance for it to just be an abstraction of, I need to understand why there's a line connecting these couple of things. So show me a thing that's important and show me that it's connected to something else. Yeah. So that and like just tell me that I should care about that, or let me tell you that you should care about that, and let's depict that. I think that's the core of it, making some sense of that, coming up with maybe some categorization that makes sense across a lot of us, so that this becomes a true tool, so that we can have a conversation around
Mm-hmm.
it. We're building a campfire out of this sort of thing, so let's harness the information we're putting on there, and it's not just the squiggly lines, but I think if you can get away from that chronology of first this and then that, and you move into the Kairos of things, right? The timing of refine my definition of this, but the way that I like to relate it to the people component of it is it's the timing of opportunity and necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty fair? Okay.
Yeah, you're saying Kairos. For folks who are like, I don't know what Kairos really means, I hear it used sparingly.
Right.
And I think what you're trying to do is sort of contrast chronos, chronological time, and Kairos, which was sort of a complementary other notion of time that was less about that linear. Even if it was elastic, chronos and chronology still implies a linear
Clock
sequence.
time.
It's sequential, I guess.
It's
There's
clock
a
time,
whole
1 minute after the other.
We can do the like Greek deep dive on this, which I'll spare you all, because then yes.
Right.
But the chronos, or the Kairos as you've described it, I think here is very much what you're talking about. It's a sense of timing and opportunity that has really less to do with like the sequential before and after, and more about some of the other things that you're hinting at.
Right. It's more triggers is it. And so I
Or
think
the
about that
latent
as
sort of potential, or the kind of I often think, again, I can't help it in like science, sort of brain ways, I always think about it being like, something that might be suspended in solution, but you drop an object in and then a reaction occurs, or the catalyst. That we often use that catalyst word in the way that it means it accelerates something, but a catalyst or some of those other kind of trigger metaphors help. So I think that's a good way to think about it. I can't help but interject the rhetorical notion too, at least in the study of rhetoric and the world of rhetoric. It's one of the places people still, I think, use that word commonly, because it also is something that rhetoric calls a rhetorical situation. So when you are sort of identifying and analyzing or assessing the landscape of meaning around something, and you're thinking about the logic / rationale / I don't mean logic in just the simplest sense, but the nature of what you're thinking about. You're thinking about the expertise or the trustworthiness of the person or source of information, and you're thinking about the pathos, the like emotional and affective quality of its impact. These are all things that you might look at in connection to each other, and what they make possible and what they don't make possible, what they afford as affordances. Right. And that taken together is this sort of sense of Kairos. So the rhetorical situation around an environment kind of speaks to the Kairos, or the opportune moment. Anyway, I have so much more to say, but I want to let you, because I know
I love that, because that's exactly what the objective is. That's the sort of the meat and potatoes of this ecosystem map. Then is not to accurately represent an experience per se, but to really just say these things are connected. They are floating in space. It doesn't really matter the sequential order of things. Just to know that when there is a tug in this direction, that tug will reverberate, because these things are connected, that there is some substance there.
Yeah. You know what this is making me realize? Live on this call, everybody. I often
we need the animation of the light bulb for both of us. Yeah.
Mine's just on permanently. I mean, this is not good. But so people who, again, have interacted with me, like I have been known to kind of talk about, when I get asked about a lot of these questions, these topics, we talk a lot about in systems oriented work, the desire to zoom out in space and time. Of course, as Jen always hampers on about, you have to then zoom back in, blah, blah, blah. But that space and time part, right? People kind of go, okay, but how do you do that? Like, I know how to zoom out spatially and look at the ecosystem in which the stuff is operating and maybe go out a few layers. What do you mean about time? And then I go, well, if you zoom out in time, it kind of just means looking upstream and looking further downstream or speculating or whatever. But I think our natural inclination as humans is still to think about those two things. And of course they are the same, but we have to peel them apart. We have to map them sometimes. And so you get your chronological journey maps or service blueprints. You get your chronos maps.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear what you're saying about an ecosystem. And I think about ecosystem maps being, again, not chronological, but more spatial, for lack of regional, both literally and figuratively. But I don't know if an ecosystem map, at least terminologically, does justice to Kairos. So I almost feel like there's this third thing. So there's
Mm-hmm.
chronological time-based mapping or articulating or visualizing, and there's spatial arrangement, maybe relationship mapping. Oh my God, the hand motions I'm making today. But then there's this like third other thing that is represented in a way that you're describing. And these all mash together, of course. They can all be laid on top of each other. But it's reminding me of, because I can like hear the echoes of folks being like, what you guys just make a map with a bunch of squiggly lines on it. Yeah, we do. But I did,
If it helps.
it's for me, my brain is like, okay, journey maps, chronological maps, ecosystem maps. So it's like kind of always one or the other. You're either doing something with like that logical chronological time, or you're doing the maybe, the spatial stuff, reveals where there is Kairos or opportunity, and the temporality aspect of this gets muddied. But there was a project we did, and I'll give this as an
Mm-hmm.
example, hopefully help make this more concrete for what I want to say. I'm trying to think. I guess there's no reason I can't say who the client was. This was a while back. This was when I was at MadPound.
Mm-hmm.
We were working with the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, and the project had a lot of different parts and goals. But one particular aspect, we were working with a team focused on the general public. So they serve a lot of populations, a lot of different types of folks, people who work in engineering and construction roles and contracting and such. But they have a really important part of their mission is focused on fire and life safety for the general public, and especially very at-risk populations. Elderly folks, people in rural populations tend to be at much higher risk for things like fire and certain other types of safety hazards. So it's a lot of education. It's a lot of how you can reach people in the moments where they're actually receptive to noticing, hearing, learning, changing, whatever. And one of the things we did in the work we were doing here was, they kind of were interested in like, can you help us understand how and where to reach people when we know they'll actually take note of what we're trying to share, with these certain tips and best practices, things about, cooking and the usual smoke detector stuff, and keeping your grill far enough away from your house that if it lights something on fire, it doesn't light your house on fire. And
Mm-hmm.
in rural populations, it's harder to reach. And in elderly populations, harder to reach this population with like information campaigns. And I think they were expecting at the beginning of this project that we might come up with insights from our research that produced this map that said, over the course of someone's life, here is where you should reach them.
Mm-hmm.
Or in an ecosystem map sense, here are the places, or the
Right.
relationships by which, you should reach these people. And in fact, what we ended up, we kind of banged our head against the wall on both of those and realized it wasn't going to do what we learned from all of our participatory design with all these populations was, I used the term co-design, participatory design.
Mm-hmm.
One or the other.
Yeah.
These folks were integral to the work. And what we ended up doing was saying, this is really more about windows of opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
some of these windows of opportunity exist in a temporal or chronological time sense, like at a certain age, when someone, gets to this point, there are these events that usually occur, and these are some options for reaching them with education. Some of the windows of opportunity were not at all tied to time at all. They were things like if a person actually knew another person who experienced a fire or saw a, fire related news story. These things have nothing to do with how old you are, where you are in your life journey, and they're much more about, that's a moment of Kairos. Some of the other things
Yeah.
were like moving house, or when you have children or are newly caring for children, maybe you're a grandparent babysitting grandkids, whatever it might be. So we identified all of these, what I would say now are Kairos moments. And
Mm-hmm.
all that did going to say all that did. All we ended up having to do with it is convince them to let us put it in a visual map that didn't look like a journey map or the ringed ecosystem relationship map. And instead, we just visualized these 5 or 6 really powerful moments of Kairos or windows of opportunity. And obviously, in our work, and I think most people who are going to be like watching something like this, you're not going to get paid to just be like, hey, look, there's a window of opportunity over here. You got to actually provide some stuff. What do we do? How do we reach them in that moment? What are the channels or other people or trusted resources through which we can build a relationship with people, share important things at opportune times, support or scaffold people taking action or changing something? So there's some intervention design implied here, but the window of opportunity map that we made that included all of those factors and what to do to reach people in those moments, I would never have used the word Kairos with that client. That's exactly what that was. So it's interesting because I'm like, now I'm going back and I'm kind of recategorizing that map. I would never have called it a journey map because it wasn't chronological, and I would probably never have called it an ecosystem map. We did literally say these were windows of opportunity, but it was a Kairos map. So
yeah,
yay.
I love that. Yeah. All right, that's because we love our touch points. That's kind of how
Well, I chuckled earlier. We were saying before we started recording, just to interrupt too, moments that matter. Who here's been like, who's been harmed or traumatized by the moments that matter language of the like design 2000s? So there is some hint of this out there. People are going to go, you mean Kairos? Yeah, we just call those moments that matter and we highlight them on our journey map with a little star. Anyway, go on.
Still, our journey maps were still these linear sort of, first this happened, then that happened, so that we couldn't get out of that. But I tried to take that along a little further and said, great, now we've got all the squiggly lines and the circles, and that didn't, I don't want to say it didn't work, but there was still more to it.
Yeah,
right?
That's not it. Stop there. That's not, the point isn't to have a nice map. Unless you want to hang it on the wall.
Well, even then, it was still, I went from one extreme to another. I went from the blocks and the first this and then that, the waterfall, to the bowl of spaghetti. And it's not either because we had constraints that we would put in places.
Right.
And so now where I am is in a more modular place. And growing up with old analog synthesizers, this works for me beautifully, but it's a very there are very rigid spaces of, I remember where I first started putting this together was working on onboarding. So how do people intersect with a new organization when you've taken one organization and integrated it into another? How do they start to meet the new organization? What are those touch points? How do you find that? Well, it's definitely not in a chronological first this and then that sort of way. It's as they sort of wander through the field. But there are some things. How do they get their laptop? Well, that's a pretty rigid process.
Yeah.
How do they get their insurance set up or their benefits set up and their employee ID set up and go through training, onboarding training, that kind of thing. There are some of those things that are aligned that way.
Yeah.
And even then, I was finding that there are these sort of stage gates that have some preconditions and these perceptible changes, and it's not this anymore, it's that. We've gone from a space where I've taken my old laptop where I was on the Microsoft ecosystem and I've sent that in to be drilled, and now I've gotten my new laptop which is on the Google ecosystem. It is now I've perceptibly made a transition from my cocoon to the butterfly state. So like we've used all of these metamorphosis sort of metaphors also to kind of show true transitions here, but those preconditions were also identified as necessary with these interdependencies also. That's, well, you can't do any of the rest of it until the badging happens and the benefits happen, those sort of things. So that becomes, there is a relative chronology in this as well, which became a lot easier for people to look at. Those first bowls of spaghetti were just overwhelming. And they got a message across. They got important messages across. But when I got to the more modular way of looking at this, it was, we're ready to start playing with this and do stuff with it. It was very accessible.
I mean, what I hear you saying is that it isn't just all one extreme or the other. I mean, it can't be, right? And there's also, I think, this, you know, as we've said a few times, when you first really kind of get your hands around this notion of complexity and the complex behavior of systems that can have things like emergence, it does kind of blow up a lot of mental constructs. And so it kind of becomes, I'm just going to embrace the fact that everything is everything. And, you know, time is just a point particle unity that is everything, you know, like, you know, that's all well and good. But that doesn't actually then help us achieve anything that we're trying to necessarily achieve, which is fine. That might not be the goal. But I think to your point, it's good to remind folks that we certainly acknowledge there are always a mix of pieces of, and sometimes parts within other parts, nested, Russian nesting doll style or overlapping style. The plurality here is really key. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of that, especially when you're so gung-ho to say, screw you, Newtonian physics, I've had enough of you, you know, and then go to the other end of the spectrum. When in reality, most of our work is a mix. And there are going to be places where those controls or scaffolds or constraints really do hold down the fort and let you move those modular pieces. So I like that. And what I'm thinking about too is just back to the word temporality, that I think your example is a good illustration of, is that I think this notion, I think temporality as it pertains or is interesting to complexity interested practitioners is kind of multiple things. It's one, it is pluralities. It's acknowledging that time and the timing of things isn't just one thing. So it isn't necessarily going to be something you can orchestrate or engineer in the sense that we've talked about. But it also just means that there are multiple potential timings in some cases. And I think some people see that and they go, cool, I'm going to make the world's biggest choose your own adventure outline, or, you know, I'm going to create the world's most complex but still detailed flowchart and if then, you know, rules. But there is a point where the if then choose your own adventure outline can't handle the autonomy or agency or self-determination of the actors inside that system, right? So, but nonetheless, there's plurality at work that I think is an important factor. When someone says, how does temporality factor into what you guys do? One is figuring out ways to acknowledge and actually demonstrate or illustrate or work with the plurality of time and time experiences. But I think separate from that is also the notion of duration, or like whether something has permanence or not, or if it's fleeting or not. And so acknowledging that some things are going to have more permanent versus less permanent, more fleeting existence or shape or structure to it. And so, and I'm sure there are also like 18 other lenses on temporality we could get to, but those two in particular feel like we've just called those out naturally in our examples in our practice. And maybe that's the big answer for the moment. Not that we have to stop talking about this because we'll just go for an hour, but I'm hearing those two things big and loud, because it is partly that the plurality aspect of time, even whether it's chronos or kairos, you know, I think is hard for some people to get to working with. And then I think accepting that things that you might think are permanent aren't, or things that won't be permanent suddenly become permanent. You know, the nature of duration and permanence is really challenged by a lot of what complexity shows us.
So when you say the plurality of temporality, you're talking about I'm not picking up. I understand to an extent, but what I'm thinking of, tell me if we're thinking about the same thing. When I've done narrative research in the past, we're all talking about the pandemic, but the start and end point for person A and person B are very, very different. What was affecting this person versus that person was different. And so their scale and understanding of that sort of thing was very different. Is that what you're
I
talking
think that's
about
a
in
great
that
example.
plurality?
Yeah, I think there's both. Maybe to unpack it further, I think there's plurality in the sense that there is a relativism in the experience that people have about time.
Sure.
So two people could experience literally the same amount of time passing, measured on a clock, if you trust clocks. Let's hope everyone trusts
Mm-hmm.
clocks. And yet still have a very different experience of that time. Isn't there like that famous Einstein quote that like, a minute with a pretty girl feels like it goes by way too fast. A minute with your hand on a hot stove is obviously like, maybe it's a second, I don't know. But regardless, it was his way of trying to explain relativism. So we need to not muddy the waters with that. But nonetheless, I think what you've described is definitely what I'm talking about, especially if you also allow for this additional part to it, which is not just the human experience of time and the plurality of that and potential for that having to do with anything you're designing as an experience, a service, etc.
Right.
You have to account for that. You have to allow for that. You hopefully design with that as part of the materials you're designing with. But the other piece of it is also to say, maybe this goes back to the modularity bit. There are many ways that a person could potentially experience something, even in the modular sort of blocked out aspects, that mean a person A could experience what you're talking about mapping with. This piece is pretty like locked down and controlled and understand, we see A to B to C kind of happens repeatedly every time. And then this other piece over here is a little bit less so. Even having done that, there are multiple configurations. So I said plurality, and I appreciate being able to try to articulate this better because it's not something I do very often. I think of the plurality not just being in the experience of time, from like that experiential or like kind of the phenomenon of time. I also think about it as the multiple potential configurations that things can unfold over time, even when we're working with the modular view that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know if that even answers, but
it does. It reminds me, and I was just talking about this recently. I don't know why. When I was working with Department of State, I think I'm going to talk to this to an extent because I'm going to talk about this from 30,000 feet. I was.
His name's Kyle Godby. He's right here, everybody.
I don't even. That's not funny in 2025. The stuff I was doing with Department of State was like mapping out big experience and again relatively end of how people were interacting. There was this real like enthusiasm of, we do customer research, we do UX testing, all of that. And when I looked at it, they were right. And they actually did some quality stuff. They were looking at, when I open up the app, do I understand the language in there? And when I push this button, does that make sense? And they were asking very direct questions, and they were getting the right answers that were driving what the final app was going to look like in that experience.
Yeah.
But when you strung all of those touch points together, where the customer started, which was not the point that they submit their application, it started with whatever was driving them to say, I think I need to go interact with the government right now. They're the ones that are going to solve this thing. Whatever that trigger was, to the point that I've found resolution, whether or not that included the government or however removed that was. That became my scope of integrating that into where the government service fit in. Then it was a very, very different story of, yes, those individual touch points might have been very easy to navigate, but as a whole, it was a bit of chaos to say, yes, I got this piece of information, but it didn't coincide with the next piece of information that I got. And then I was abandoned for a period of time. So I had to get creative and find my way around. And then I got lost 5 other times and. So,
it's that stuff in between the touch points that we always talk about. It's the in between. It's not just the nodes in the network. It's what's in between. And I do think a lot of people get that and they go, okay, I get it. It's not just the nodes in the network. It's what's between. And then the instinct is to draw the lines in between and explain what the lines represent. And I'm like, but to an extent, it's never going to even be about the lines you draw between. It's what's in the gap. It's what's in the synapse, So I think that what this is kind of, I think, really hammering for me is that the instinct, when you start to acknowledge that this level of complexity exists in the domain that you're working in, people tend to go one of two ways. They do kind of what you were describing earlier. It's like, let's throw away our linear slash orchestrating kind of ways, and let's just work with the spaghetti mess, and let's create this gigamap crazy giant thing that's got so many curved lines that, you step back and behold and just realize, my God, what do I like, and again, what you end up with is something that can be useful for interrogating and challenging and having some epiphanies, but it is going to be a spaghetti mess, and it is not necessarily going to acknowledge the places where there are some handles that you can get your hand on. Yeah. The other alternative is somebody goes, well, I still need to map this out, or it doesn't have to be a visual map, but I still need to think through this. And so the only way I can do this, if I can't just add all the detail because it'll be overwhelming. So I'm going to go the other direction, and I'm going to just simplify it down, and I think about, for example, like first year design students who are like, thinking about the experience they're going to design for the first time, and they go out and they do their research, and, professors suggest to them, where you think you're starting, I want you to go back 6 steps, go even earlier, before someone even had the inkling of a thought to engage with this service. What led to that, and what led to that, and what led to that, and then same thing, the other end is think through potential unintended consequences that zoom out further beginning and end. But then they go, okay, I'm overwhelmed, so I'm still going to have to make my map, and you get it reduced down to like 3 touch points, over the course of like one timeline. So maybe at the end of the day, that's the moral of the story is, it's either going to be so messy that it isn't totally instructive, or you're going to end up finding you want to oversimplify it to the point where it's not going to be useful, and you are stuck in the no man's land between the two. And I do think the solution to that is out there, which is, some combination of giving yourself permission to create. We keep saying maps. This isn't always about maps, but give yourself the permission to create things, artifacts, processes, collaborative dynamics that can live in some space between. It's so big and complex, I can't do anything with it, versus, well, in order to get my hands around it, I simplified it for you, and now it doesn't represent reality at all. There's some in between. That windows of opportunity approach that I described earlier, what you just described here, even just being able to like zoom out a little before and a little bit after. And again, it doesn't have to be a physical thing you're making. I think some of it is also just getting the people in the room to understand you may not be able to engage that way with it. Like, it has to just stay complex, and there's going to be stuff in between the nodes that you can't draw a line on and label what it is. Let it be that way.
Yeah, sit with that. Exactly. Be uncomfortable in that for a moment. Yeah.
Forever.
Sure. You ready for another adjacent one that this reminded me of?
Yeah.
Some of the conversations that I've had there, your mention of first year design students, when I was some of the interns that I've mentored over the years, the stuff that they're thinking about right now blows my mind. I absolutely love the conversations that they're coming in with in terms of like 25 years from now, when our cities have to be in different places and human migration is what we're dealing with. And I'm going, that's hasn't been on my list of things. I've got a list, but that hasn't been there. I love that you're coming into the world thinking about this sort of stuff. But it's made me think about permanence also in the things that we design.
Yeah.
And I love the way Daniel Schmachtenberger has just plainly said, the solutions that we've created have ultimately become the problems that we have to solve for. And so, the county that I live in, I always say, is I'm in suburbia, on the outside of Richmond here, and it's all parking lots. Everything is parking lots, and it's just hideous for the most part. These are the sort of things that we will have to build around because we've established this permanence. A buddy of mine went off into San Francisco to help them sort out the problem of all of the commercial real estate that has been built and specifically zoned and met the criteria for commercial real estate. And now there's no offices there anymore because everyone's working from home or remotely. And now there are these empty buildings that are just decaying and losing money everywhere. So how do they repurpose that? And so, how do we design for impermanence? How do we recognize that some of the problems that we have are not the problem that we're facing, but the fact that we have entrenched ourselves in a reality that does not have a future.
Yeah.
And so, and it's part of the conversation that I have with my climate denier friends. Let's assume that you're right. That's what the world is changing. We can agree on that. Let's not get into the details of the how or the why or the what, but we can agree that the world is changing. The Earth is changing. If you want to say that it's natural progress, that's fine. That doesn't change the fact that Miami and Dhaka are going to be underwater at some point. There are going to be a billion people, particularly in the global south, that are going to be affected by these sort of things. And so the problem then becomes, how do we resolve the permanence that we've established, the infrastructures that we've built ourselves, that we haven't imagined ourselves out of just yet? How do we just assume we're gonna have a different place? The shoreline is now going to be southern Georgia at some point.
I mean, I think that I just responded.
I'm being a little flippant, but
I'm at, but I get it. I think that instinct to imagine, to put so much energy into imagining other futures is still, I struggle with it so much for all the reasons we've talked about previously. But like, I think there's something, hearing you kind of articulate this, because this is something, we talk about a lot. I think a lot of people in our communities think about a lot. I think it comes back to this like core challenge, which is, even if you start to recognize every act or decision you enact has the potential to have unintended consequences, and frankly, most of the time will. And some of them may be great, and some of them may be terrible. You can't say for sure if they're going to be, they're unintended. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. They can be both. But I think everybody's kind of recognizing that. And then still the instinctive response is to say, if I can just zoom out far enough, model this accurately enough, think through every possible scenario and contingency enough, I then can anticipate every possible outcome and every possible unintended consequence and be ready and or try to do things, that get us to the good side.
Favorite term, future-proof.
Oh my God, it's funny we've not talked about this yet. I hate this.
Future-proof, right?
I want to be future-proof? What? I feel like you want the opposite. In fact, I think I once posted something like that on LinkedIn, and I was surprised the interest got. But I think that is probably one of the, quote, challenges of our day, is that people are already kind of understanding this challenge, the nature of yesterday's solutions became today's problems, and unintended consequences rule the day. And yet, I think getting folks a step further to realizing that no amount of modeling and contingency and scenario planning is going to make it so that you can actually avoid unintended consequences. Those activities have value for other reasons, but they will never make it so that you can eliminate unintended consequences, which means we're better off focusing on getting good at, I'm going to say the phrase, sensing and responding, because it's like being adaptive, right? Like it's, everybody should know that I'm getting really sick of sense and respond. I use this phrase a lot. We all have to. It's important to contrast with things, but it's definitely going the route of the, anyway. So nonetheless, though, I just go there because it's like, if you accept that even despite your best efforts to be more thoughtful, to have a better understanding of what kind of second and third and fourth order effects things you're doing might have, all of that is noble and desirable and we should do. But you have to accept as like a complete universal truth that there will still be unintended consequences. And so if that is taken as, accepted, to your point about the climate example, what do you do then? That means you then also invest in the processes and the interactions and the relationships and the signaling and the monitoring that will help you see when an unintended consequence is starting to emerge and it's undesirable. And then you hopefully can also have built the means by which you can quickly react to it instead of have to wait 10 years to change the zoning laws to let us turn an office building into apartments. Because you can sense that that's an issue, but if you can't respond, you're in no good shape. And even if you're quick to respond, it takes you too long to sense something shifting, then what good is that? So getting good at sensing, getting good at responding, both of them in, agile, quick ways, I think is just, I don't know, that's it in a nutshell. I also think there's a level of, well, maybe I'll pause there. I have a sense that you have something good to say, and
I think there's another piece of it too in the actual things that we build.
That's literally what I was going to say. Was we're not doing stuff anymore, right? It's in a meta way. You've got to think about it in that network, nodes, and spaces sort of visual.
Well,
it's less about the stuff now, and it's building what's around the stuff so that it allows the stuff you build to be less permanent and/or for you to respond to changes that you didn't anticipate.
Like our cities have enough places to put cars, like how many times over the number of cars that actually exist on the road right now. That's how we built the policies.
I don't know if I agree with this. I can never find a parking spot downtown.
Overage. Yeah,
I think you're wrong.
No, there's city in general. The way that we zone,
look at what we
Yeah. So there's more room for cars than, and at the same time, we've got housing shortages, that kind of thing. Yeah. So there is no quick way to just spin a parking lot into an apartment building.
No. And that's because there is path dependence, and we're not working on a blank slate. So we can rail against what we've done in previous generations, but it doesn't do us any good. You've got to start from where you are right now.
And that's what I'm thinking is as we're building things, I like, the Japanese style of architecture that I can never remember the name of. That is the joint fitted stuff. No nails. Everything just fits together neatly and uses its own weight and gravity to hold it together.
Yeah.
Part of that was because of how many earthquakes that it needed to move, and if it fell down, and they put it back together. It needed to be a sort of resilience to collapse and reconstruction. And so how do we think about building things those ways? When I think about impermanence, the commercial properties, how do you think about not just the creation of it, but how do you think about zoning things in ways that it becomes much more ambidextrous in its utility and function? So it's the awareness of what impact is this going to have and what are the possible states, but it's also just recognizing that we have no idea, and the more fixed that this is, the more expensive and more energy it's going to take to repurpose it later when it becomes the problem that we're dealing with.
I think I've gone on about this before in a previous episode, but we're talking about degrees of freedom. And we're talking about designing things to have and maintain as many degrees of freedom as possible, which allows for as many future adaptations or evolutions or iterations that it needs to be or that it can possibly have. Another Bucky Fuller quote for the crew here, but it's not for me to, control you or design or do whatever it is I'm going to do to you. I'm here to maintain or help serve you by keeping as many degrees of freedom as possible. I'll find that it's a nice short quote, but it's that sentiment is the first time I ever heard it was through him. It was like, for me to serve you means to help you maintain as many degrees of freedom as possible. And it doesn't just mean on the human level from a liberatory, kind of angle. It also means the material things that we create, whether objects or the experiences or the environments that we have some hand in modulating or designing. How do you design to keep as many degrees of freedom available so that the system can flex in the face of changes and doesn't get stuck in that rigid crystalline structure that then becomes fragile and vulnerable?
Yeah.
So
I think every time I've I think every time I've met with Chris Matz, he said at least once, when you're working with complexity and ambiguity, commitments are expensive and options are valuable.
Same concept. Yeah, I love that.
Yep.
I love that.
Yep. Exactly. Really straightforward. That's stuck with me.
Which I find people are quick to misunderstand at the surface level as being you don't want to make a decision. I'm just keeping all my
Yeah.
options open, or I'm staying in the divergent mode and never getting to a convergent mode. And it
Right.
is not that. And I think that is a really important distinction, or maybe a subtlety to this conversation that I'd like to hear more of in the wider world, frankly, that there is a very real difference between designing to maintain degrees of freedom and maximum adaptive capacity, actively designing for that, rather than staying in a keeping options open and avoiding making a decision and da-da-da. In fact, I know there are people and there are definitely situations where you can make the case for delay your decision making as long as possible. There is a strong reason to do that in complex systems, in the sense that you don't want to prematurely converge on something that closes down your options. It actually has the counterintuitively exact effect we're talking about trying to avoid. But there's a difference between what we're talking about and sort of just saying, I'm afraid to act. We just want to keep everything open. We want to stay in that brainstorm and divergent mode and never actually move forward. When in reality, you make decisions and learn as you go. And that's the whole point, is learn through doing and decide your way through. And anyway, so
let's use this platform, this conversation, as an example. It started with us just talking and saying, we've got there's some people are having similar conversations. There's some interest around this, and maybe we bring it to Complexity Lounge and we'll see if there's any interest beyond just these conversations.
Yeah.
And it didn't require a massive investment. It didn't require massive commitments or us to bulldoze anything and break anything. They were gracious enough to bring us on. We had a big conversation. There was more interest. We were energized and compelled to continue. We got on a free platform that records these things. None of us went out and built a whole studio or did anything to
we're keeping it low fidelity. And
these are all very small steps that work in a general direction, that are a continuance. They are certainly action, and they are we might find out that something is going to blow up along the way, but we're not so over invested, or we're not pushing enough energy in that explosion is going to be anything beyond anything critical. So I think that's the sort of idea. We've been applying these. We've been eating our own dog food.
I hope people have picked up on that before now. But if you're here on whatever this is, number 7, and you're just kind of putting it together, that Kyle and I are actually kind of like living it out loud in front of you for you all to see. Well, here it is.
Yeah. So that's the other temporality component, is the small moves, the probe sense respond component of it, which I'm not sick of that yet. I think that I don't use it enough.
Phrases get you. We need to talk about this too, but I'll let you. I want you to finish on what you're going to say.
I don't use that enough. Probably for a lot of it's not a thing that I think will resonate with anyone that I talk to. So I just read it off. I read it myself, and I'm fine with it. Or I will translate it into the sort of local context.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm doing that too.
But I don't find
myself saying it, because there are some things that I'm definitely like, I'm sick of hearing other people use this phrase this way. We're going to come back to that. But I was mostly just saying that I definitely also hear, there are things that I say enough that I feel like in my own head I'm becoming a broken record. And then I have to remind myself I am using these words and phrases with multiple different people across different contexts. And they're hearing me say something once or twice, not 100 times a day. If I have 5 conversations in a day, I feel like I've just repeated everything all day long and everyone's sick of it. And then in reality, of course, it was the first time that person heard a thing and thought about a thing that day. So it just takes me back to teaching. And when you teach the same class 4 times in a row, by 6th period, I would be sharing something and I'd be like, wait, did I already do this? And the kids are like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm just thinking about first period. So anyway, there's a little bit of that goes on. But the sense and respond phrase I use a lot, because a lot of my collaborators and clients and such, I think they need a quick way to understand what we're talking about is different from business as usual, like at that highest level, like not even translated down into the individual context. And that phrase can actually do double duty as both talking about getting away from like command and control styles of management into more sense and respond styles of management, which I'll come back to that, but not today. But it also can mean more about that kind of stance that you take to any kind of domain you find yourself trying to navigate. So it does the duty of both contrasting a current and a preferred, as well as giving a good label for what is the actual thing we're going to do together. Get better at sensing and do the sensing and continue doing the sensing, and get better at being able to respond and keep being able to respond. And in this case, adapt or whatever it is, learn, grow. So I that term does a lot of heavy lifting for me, so it's not going to go away anytime soon. But I just definitely, if anybody has followed me through other interviews and stuff, they've got it. There's so many keywords. I feel like there's a drinking game we do need to make now, or a bingo card for like Kyle's favorite phrases and Jen's favorite phrases and all the other complexity buzzword bingo that's out there. But let's go back to phrases. Do you want to talk about other phrases? Because we had a nice chat about this earlier and then said this should have been recorded. So we can't repeat it word for word, but
let's do it.
Tell me about a phrase you're really sick of.
Oh, I'm so sick of hearing the map is not the territory. And I'm sick of hearing it specifically. And it's usually the one-liner. It's either in a conversation when we're talking about we're looking at all of these things and we're trying to build this inventory. Everyone put the stickies up and we want to understand the sort of zeitgeist, and everyone's staring at it and someone thinks they're going to be clever and have this mic drop moment of, but the map is not the territory. Or I just see like somebody draws some sort of framework or map or something on LinkedIn, and then the first comment is just the map is not the territory, and that's it. No context, no nothing else. And
are they even like accrediting like Zerbinski, like they actually probably not
no. It's I don't even know if they're arguing anything. I don't know what it is. I don't.
Yeah. Well, so dear listeners, when Kyle shared this with me at some point prior,
I was belly aching. That's all.
I got a real kick out of the way he shared it in our Miro board. And I laughed. And I was like, it's funny because I don't mind this one. I mean, I don't mind it at all because the sentiment is very apt and true, and I love it. And I actually, remember the first time I read or encountered this and some of his writing on the subject. And I was like, so it's not about that. But this has not become a phrase that like bugs me when I see people using it the way Kyle's describing. And so I remember like asking about it. And so what I hear, and I find this just kind of fun. I feel like one of our future meeting Complexity Lounge meetup breakouts could even be, which complexity-ish phrase is like triggering for you? Everybody go into your respective breakout rooms and talk about it.
I like that.
But this is one that like I don't mind because in my circles, I don't see people using the phrase that way. The places where I'm seeing people really latch on this one particular, quote, the map is not the territory. It's showed up in blogs. It's just kind of having a viral moment. I'm not seeing it used in that kind of like thought terminating cliche or like conversation mic drop way. So, and then on the flip side, there are phrases and things that I've described having the same reaction to like, oh, and you're like, oh, I use that all the time still. I don't know. I don't have that problem. And it's because we have different circles.
Remind me of one.
What were we talking about? Well, I have a hard time with a lot of people using aspects from quantum physics and quantum field dynamics, but like entanglement is one that I get very itchy about because it's just like, everything's entangled. Or what did I say earlier? Everything's interconnected. Like everything's entangled.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, all done. Like there's nothing else to say because everything's interconnected. Yeah. That's it. That's all there is to say. And you were like, I don't hear people using that in a terminating way. That invites more conversation. And in my experience, the map is the territory has invited more thinking and conversation. Well, what does it mean if we're mapping something, but we're acknowledging that it is not, like the menu is not the meal. That's the other version of that, right? So what it came down to me was, the saying, you don't hate Mondays, you hate capitalism, whatever. So we don't hate the phrases or even overuse of a phrase. I'm okay with that too. We hate any use of a phrase as a thought terminating cliche or conversation kind of like punctuation. So
fair enough.
I feel that we got there, but I cannot help myself because I love this sentiment about the map being the territory so much that I even pulled out a few of my other favorite quotes that I think swim near this. So if you'll indulge me,
Please.
I don't even like Herman Melville. Well, that's a
Okay.
lie. I've read Moby Dick 4 times, trying very
Oh.
hard. But I appreciate what he's doing. We can come back to that someday when we do our book club. But nonetheless, he has some short stories that are fabulous. Benito Cereno's a good one. Bartleby the Scrivener, A+, everyone reads it, or should read it, obviously. Nonetheless, this quote of his, "It is not down in any map, truer places never are." Right? Simple little thought, right? And so I keep that handy. It's not the exact same sentiment, but thinking about how we map things and understand maps. And we are always talking about maps in our work here between, Kairos, Chronos, journey maps, ecosystem maps. So to do some honor to that. Another one that I hung on to, what distinguishes a map is that it is entirely oriented toward an experimentation in contact with the real. Do you want to guess who said that? It's our boy Deleuze. So
I was going to say, I have heard that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yep. And then I have 2 quotes from Cormac McCarthy, because I'm a Cormac McCarthy stan. Okay. One is, "The world has no name," he said. "The names of the Cerros and the Sierras and the deserts exist only on maps. We name them so that we do not lose our way. Yet it was because the way was lost to us already that we have made those names. The world cannot be lost. We are the ones. And it is because these names and these coordinates are our own naming that they cannot save us. They cannot find for us the way again." It's a little bleak, but it's poetic in the sense that I can see that it's part of what it's what you're, I think, also tapping into. And then I've shared this one before, but she knew that in the end, you really can't know. You can't get a hold of the world. You can only draw a picture. Whether it's a bull on the wall of a cave or a partial differential equation, it's all the same thing. So that was my defense of Krupinski's "The map is not the territory," that I didn't even need to defend because it's not about the phrase. But I hear these little things that get very buzzy, whether it's a quote, whether it's an idea, whether it is just this koan, and these seem to make the rounds in the systems and complexity world with like a level of velocity that I don't see in other communities. And I don't know if that is something you see or not. And when this happens, and I start to see it get used in the ways we're both talking about, as a thought terminating thing, or as a way of signaling, I belong to this club, or I have some expertise, or I have some credibility, or I'm a thought leader. And, when I find my first instinct to be like, the next thing my brain does is go shuffling through the card catalog in my mind for all of the see alsos. And so I couldn't help but do that there. But I'm curious, A, do you also do that? Or do you engage differently with these ideas? And B, well, no, we'll just stop with A.
I don't do the card catalog usually. If it sends me down a rabbit hole, it's not the similes. It maybe, but it's not like.
Wouldn't it be like a mind map? I mean, I like the card catalog one because I just literally think of the little cards, or it's like, see, also they're all in the same drawer. But it's also the mind map of like, this thing sits next to this thing, and it may not be because of the same semantic style of linkage, but it might just be these things sit near.
Maybe, no? But when I say when things sit next to, it's definitely not in a thesaurus kind of way. It is. There's distance there. There's enough distance that if I was to say like, I read "Map is not the territory," and then I was reading about the effects of poisonous mushrooms, you'd go, I don't understand how you got there, but it would make perfect sense to me somehow. Like that's the sort of thing that's So yes.
Oh gosh, we're not doing metaphors today, but this is where the notion of analogy and metaphorical thinking gets so interesting, because there's so many semantic structures and parallels you can have that aren't just thesaurus relationships. I grabbed all the map ones because that was what I wanted to get into today, but there's such there's a fun place to dig there.
I think what's coming up for me as you're saying that, which is kind of interesting. I'm trying not to be sensitive to it because I'm really trying to invite more people to this conversation, especially after our Lexia Lounge conversation.
You mean you're struggling with wanting to be open and inclusive, but also maintain some level of... No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, not that I want to I'm not going to be the person that's going to be like, it's not like that, it's like this, because
I will
uh
sometimes.
and I'm not, that's not wrong. I think there should be like, there are a lot of things that I will correct on that
Yeah.
if I feel like I do have a degree of like, no, I know a thing, I've got some experience with this, but hopefully it's in like a, like, let me help you out with that kind of
Sure.
thing, not a let me
Yeah.
um and I more often than not try to do it in a non-public kind of way.
I think that's the right way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope. Especially LinkedIn is a place where like there's a lot of public posturing that's happening, and so
The thing.
there's a sensitivity to that. Yeah, and usually where I'm finding stuff is where that posturing has gone wrong.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if we've talked about the Dunning-Kruger thing here,
We did a
but
little.
I think we
Yeah.
did. Yeah, it's. I don't know if it's still a thing or not. But
Yeah.
there's this eagerness to say, I found this thing. Now I want to go out and explain it to everyone.
Yeah.
And that was definitely my downfall. I kind of blew it. I didn't really understand it, and I blew it up. And luckily, I didn't do it very publicly. I did it with a small group
Yeah.
of people within the
Yeah.
org, and they weren't in a position to say you got it wrong, but they were in a position to say I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
humbling, and I got to go back and work on that. But when people are doing it in public spaces, then it's like, it's kind of, oh, how do I want to support this.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're excited. Take a few steps. Like, just
I mean,
wait, sit with it.
some of that's just as simple as, finding the language that is an invitation to consider something more
Mhm,
than, yes and then hopefully that can ultimately lead to them. There's some level of self-correcting on its own. But if I in general look at a place like LinkedIn as a total cesspool of that performative nonsense that you've described, but I'm still on there all the time because I've made a point to curate who's in my feed. So I'm learning
mhm,
cool things and I'm seeing cool posts
mhm,
for the most part, although I'm also seeing lots of garbage.
mhm,
But when I engage, I kind of operate on a principle of like radical authenticity. So you're getting
mhm,
me 100% of the time. Like what you see is what you get. And that makes it a lot easier to do everything you've just described.
mhm.
But to that end, I wanted to ask you, so you started to say, oh, this is like accidental product placement. Is this too obvious? I should put
So,
that away.
uh,
But you were saying I'm sensitive to, but I try to be less sensitive to. Is that what you were going to say? Are you sensitive to people wanting to run with things before they understand it, or were you going to say something else?
yeah, because I like there are a lot of times that I jump out and I'm like, yes, let me argue with you
Got
here,
it.
and then I kind of back off and I'm like,
Yeah.
I maybe if this was written in a way that says, I found a thing and I'm soliciting feedback, I want to start some discourse on this, I'm there, let's have some, I would push on this, I would question this. That's how I will start framing
Yeah.
things. But when people are like, I discovered a thing, and then they invest in like drawing this giant infographic, I'm like,
And that's the pressure
I don't
to
want to touch it
not
at the
be
moment.
learning in public and to have expertise already. And so what I hear is that you wait for the invitation like a vampire. You don't enter the house until you've been invited.
That's fair. Yeah.
And
Although I
then
do message some of them on offline and say, I think you're
really,
into some interesting stuff. Let's connect. Very rarely does
I
anyone
was
take
about
me
to
up on
ask
that.
you, we did talk about this in a previous episode, but I have to assume the response rate on those is really low.
Minimal.
See, I don't do that.
Minimal.
And I don't do that because I have also found
Yeah.
doesn't achieve goals. And this could be a
I do it
general,
less though.
but I very
Yeah.
rarely, nobody usually wants to hear a woman explaining something to them. So,
It,
hmm.
me neither. They're not looking for my
But
info either. So that's
that's
okay.
not our goal. I mean, I think to your point earlier,
Yeah.
I think even where we started here today on the phrase stuff is it is a little different from people who are enthusiastically entering new intellectual spaces or, pursuing
Mm-hmm.
new understanding of things. That's awesome. And that's kind of why I have a lot of patience. And I think we both give a lot of grace to people, not just in the language they use, but, the way they're engaging and communicating. But I think especially in terms of phrase, it wasn't till today that I realized the like difference for me between just being something that earns a little bit of an eye roll or a scroll past versus something that really gets my goat or whatever is when someone is using a certain phrase as thought terminating, conversation
Mm-hmm.
terminating, or more
Yep.
performative than actually, dialogic. And I don't know. That's annoying. That's annoying. That's it. That's the conclusion.
That's it. That's the
But we
whole.
should do breakout rooms in the Complexity Lounge meetup where we pick like 5 phrases or words that are just out there. And maybe it'll be different by December when we have the next one. Maybe it'll be
Yeah.
different by then, but we'll pick whatever's out there. And everybody has to go into those breakout rooms and talk about whether they love or hate that phrase. That would not be a good use of time.
No, it's kind of good for us to laugh at ourselves, and I think it might actually kind of inform how we appear to other people outside of our own circle, also outside of our echo chamber, and um, uh, what we like. What I keep thinking of is we're having this conversation right now is the like being the punks in high school and having the person run up and for the first time they just heard Green Day and like, have you ever heard Green? And like, or something along those lines where you're
We
there's
talk about this
this
without sounding like a total asshole.
that's just it. Like you like being the young asshole that's like that was a thing when you were immature and you were, but like now looking back, like being the pretentious music snob is like, I don't want to be associated with that anymore.
Yeah.
So like, how do you go, cool, you like Green Day? Have you ever heard this? Have you ever heard Stiff Little Fingers? Like that should be the right answer.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
how do we break out of like that learned thing from being the
Well, it almost doesn't see the other thing where this goes is that I think sometimes people start to ask, well, what do I say in response? Or like, how do I engage? What's the right way to respond or engage when someone is coming, from that posture, from that stance? And I almost think that that's not even the right question, because that's focusing too much on like how you're going to respond and your role. And it reminds me of, this is something that my husband shared with me a couple weeks ago. He was at the dentist. So it's a good story for this, which is he was at the dentist and he was wearing a metal shirt. I don't remember what it was, but it was a band that like not, everybody walking down the street's going to know who is. And the young woman who was working, I don't know if she was, like the receptionist or something. She saw his shirt and she recognized the band. And she was very excited. She was like, "Is that a such and such shirt?" And he was like, "Yeah, it says it right here." And then it's like she kind of went on to talk about how much she loves that band, and she just kept talking and like enthusiastically was kind of blabbering on, clearly kind of like nervous, didn't really give him a chance to get a word in edgewise, and asked him sort of like, do you like all these other bands that she named, which are not at all bands that he likes, that it's so, and kind of revealed like a lack of or a difference in the way that they engage with music, right? We've talked about. And he barely got to say anything, and he was friendly and he was warm, but when he came home and related to me just in passing, we got to talking about exactly this, which that interaction didn't even leave him room to respond. And in a way that was freeing for him, because he no longer had to think about, like when I'm talking to somebody else and they go, "What do you like?" And I say metal, and they go, "Like Metallica?" And then I have to very quickly do all this calculus to decide, do I say yes or no to that? And what is the goal of this interaction? And da, 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 da. And in that example, for my husband at the dentist, he didn't have to have that internal calculus at all, because it was clear she wasn't going to give him any room to respond, because she was just nervously kind of seeking, I see you, you see me. And it freed him up of all of that and allowed him to just be, I'm here, I see you, you see me. It was a bid for connection and a bid for human, acknowledging human. And he could just provide that and be like, yeah, aren't they great? Like, I love them or whatever. Like, he got to say like one thing, which was, I saw them, whatever, and they were great. And then he got shuffled on into his appointment. And I came away from that being like, isn't that a good reminder that that's actually the main goal half the time, if not more?
I love that.
And so it's less about what's the right way for me to respond. Instead, it's just, how do I actually just let this person know that I'm a human who is going to be able to engage with them on whatever level that they're ready to engage? And it frees up so many of the choices.
I love that. I was having a conversation recently where they were talking about systems thinking, and they mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And everything in me immediately was like systems thinking, Senge, and colonialism, but I was like, you're coming into this with a curiosity and an interest, and let's like feed that. Don't let me be that. Don't, please, like, there's more here. Yes, like now is not that time to have that conversation. And I don't need to be that person either. I would, if this is our last conversation, I would rather I was the person that was saying like, please go find more. There's lots more out there. Who can I connect you with? Welcome to the community practices out there. Like whatever. Like,
I feel like that's the important difference between us two, because your love language is who can I connect you to, and my love language is can I send you a lot of links and books and papers? So
yeah,
you're gonna connect the people, and I'll connect the ideas and whatever. But like I use that
because
dichotomy.
I think out loud, and you go to the books.
Yeah, but I think that, and this may be a good thing to tee up for whenever we talk next. But I feel like that difference in your and my whatever, I think does lead to some other important differences in how we engage with this work and how we engage with clients or collaborators. And I know, again, people would love to hear some more differences. So this is not so much of an echo chamber, but there will be more.
We make this salacious. Yeah.
Is that a good place to chat or just stop for today?
Great place to, hopefully we weren't assholes in those last couple of minutes. Come tell us you like Green Day. And we will recommend the Buzzcocks and Stiff Little Fingers and The Clash and 5 other bands that will probably also be awesome.
You guys also know this is also a metaphor for everything else too. So it's not really just
yes.
You know what actually occurs to me too? Probably, again, the 10 people that are watching this. Some of the folks watching are probably folks who identify with us in this, and they're on the receiving end of this, or they're experiencing their clients or internal stakeholders are the ones that they feel like they need to engage in some smart way. And so that logic applies there, right? How do you just let the human connection guide? I think the other side, though, is there are probably folks watching this who are the person asking about Green Day, to your point. So like whichever you are, and by the way, it's going to be different in every context. Sometimes you're the kid who just found Green Day and you're trying to work up the nerve to go into the record store and ask or buy or etc. Sometimes you're the music nerd / snob, and you have to check yourself and figure out what context am I in and who am I engaging with. And so maybe that's, for me, an important takeaway is remember to know that the context and the person and such that you're engaging with kind of also helps dictate like which persona of engagement and response is valuable in that moment. So. All right. For real now, we can
I think we're good. That was a perfect place to close it. Cool.